I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never shook, baby.
Okay, welcome everyone to episode 40 of the Reckless Musecast. I am Ben D'Alessio, your host flying solo today. This is the communist and or fascist takeover of the podcast. I'm not sure which one I want to go with yet. Joe will not be joining us as he has been fired or is dead. I will get back to you on that. So today I'm going to talk about satire, a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to read one of my favorite pieces of satire ever, which is Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. I'm not going to read every word of it. I've excised some of it for brevity's sake, but it really is just a genius work of satirical writing. I'm also going to touch on a piece from the New York Times back in 2019, those simpler times, and kind of wrap it up with the Babylon Bee and some other pieces of satire in our culture and why it's important and why some of it is, I don't know if it's dying or changing, however you want to put it. It's important is really the crux of today's episode, why we need it and how important it is to culture. So I usually don't do this. I usually don't like to read word for word, but I think Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal deserves it. Again, besides the paragraphs that I've cut out for some context. This was written in 1729, which a lot of times when you read anything from back then, back in the day, it usually is pretty tedious. I never really enjoyed reading old work. Even some Shakespeare can be kind of tedious. But I think this really holds up. I would hope that A Modest Proposal is still taught in schools. It's entertaining and violent, but not graphic. It kind of is just violent enough to get the point across. It's witty, it's sharp, and it's honestly brilliant. And it's what satire, I don't want to say what it should be used for, but one of the ways that satire should be used is to attack a problem, to address a problem, pose questions, and to say something that maybe a lot of people are thinking or are observing but can't put into words. Again, for context, this was written in 1729 by Jonathan Swift, probably most famously known for, if not this, then Gulliver's Travels. Jonathan Swift was a Anglo-Irish writer. I believe he was Protestant. Writer, poet, satirist, cleric, all those things, a real Renaissance man. At the time, I think he's writing this from Dublin, or he's talking about Dublin. Ireland was part of what was called the Kingdom of Ireland, which was basically controlled by the English. And it was very poor and a terrible place to live for the vast majority of people, which was kind of the case in most of the world, especially Europe at this time. But especially so in Ireland, especially because the Irish, being not English and Catholic, were really looked down upon and subjugated to, lack of civil rights doesn't really do it, but to persecution and neglect. So the full title here is A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People in Ireland from being a burden to their parents or country and for making them beneficial to the public. Amazing subtitle there. So I'm going to go through here and read a large chunk of this and give my notes. So it is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, 6 children, all in rags and importuning every passenger for an alms. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants, who as they grow up either turn thieves for want of work, or leave their dear native country to fight for the pretender in Spain, or sell themselves to the Barbados. I'm not exactly sure what those last two parts mean. I think a lot of Irish were sent to indentured servitude in the Caribbean. So that might be what that is. Pretender in Spain. I'm assuming it's something Catholic. I don't know exactly. I didn't look up the context for that. But again, so here we are. It's kind of painting a picture of a really destitute city. And again, this is Dublin. So he continues, I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms or on the backs or at the heels of their mothers, and frequently of their fathers, is in the present deplorable state of the kingdom a very great additional grievance. And therefore, whoever could find out a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound, useful members of the Commonwealth will deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation. So again, I like how he starts with, I think it is agreed. It's very, he's writing here. And what I love so much about this, part of it is how it's so smug and elitist, again, on purpose. That's the point of it, is that he's, I think, has that very kind of typical liberal feel to it, where the elitist knows what's best for the poor. And I think that still pervades today. So, but my intention is very far from being confined to provide only for the children of professed beggars. It is of a much greater extent, and shall take in the whole number of infants at a certain age who are born of parents in effect as little able to support them as those who demand our charity in the streets. So it's saying there's greater appeal. This should be looked at as kind of a lower income, lower middle class, if there even is a middle class. It's not just the beggars. This is for anyone who could kind of, his proposal, which is forthcoming, is for anyone who might find it useful. Probably not the wealthy, but it's not just for beggars. Here he goes. As to my own part, having turned my thoughts for many years upon this important subject, again, he's an expert, and maturely weighed the several schemes of other projectors, I've always found them grossly mistaken in the computation. It is true, a child just dropped from its dam may be supported by her milk for a solar year, with little other nourishment, and most not above the value of 2 shillings, which the mother may certainly get, or the value in scraps by her lawful occupation of begging. And it is exactly at 1 year old that I propose to provide for them in such a manner as, instead of being a charge upon their parents or the parish, or wanting food and raiment for the rest of their lives, they shall, on the contrary, contribute to the feeding and partly to the clothing of many thousands. In short, he's saying the fed become the food. So the burden of having a child, or the burden of the child itself, instead can be completely flipped on its head and be used for nourishment, and to buy, instead of clothes, to use the money to buy clothing and other goods that could be used from the sale of children. And he hasn't gotten it quite yet, but he's getting there. There is likewise another great advantage in my scheme. It will prevent those voluntary abortions and that horrid practice of women murdering their bastard children, alas, too frequent among us, sacrificing the poor innocent babes, I doubt more to avoid the expense than the shame, which would move tears and pity in the most savage and inhumane breast. He then makes some computations about the number of children. I'm going to skip that part and go on to so he's saying, how many children will this affect, more or less? And then he goes on to say, for we can neither employ them in handicraft or agriculture. We neither build houses, in the country, nor cultivate land. They can very seldom pick up a livelihood by stealing till they arrive at 6, except where they are of towardly parts, although I confess they learn the rudiments much earlier, during which time they can, however, be properly looked upon only as probationers, as I have been informed by a principal gentleman of the county of Cavan, who protested to me that he never knew above 1 or 2 instances under the age of 6, even in a part of the kingdom so renowned for the quickest proficiency in that art. So basically he's saying here that they're not really doing much at 1 or 6, and then he's going to go on to 12, to 12, that children in Ireland are not really, they're more of a burden than they are a benefit to the country and to the kingdom. That's what's important. I'm assured by our merchants that a boy or a girl before 12 years old is no salable commodity. Oh, that's salable commodity. And even when they come to this age, they will not yield above 3 pounds or 3 pounds and a half a crown at most on the exchange, which cannot turn to account either to the parents or kingdom, the charge of nutriment and rags having been at least 4 times the value. So basically, they're not worth selling. Here comes the proposal. I shall now therefore humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope will not be liable to the least objection. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young healthy child, well nursed, is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, and I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricasse or a ragout. So there's the proposal. He wants to eat children. He doesn't want to necessarily eat children, but he thinks children should be eaten. And then he's going to go over all the benefits for that. He does some computing. Again, things that I'm going to skip. Then he says, always advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in the last month, so as to render them plump and fat for a good table. A child, fat for a good table. A child will make 2 dishes and an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or hind quarter will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt will be very good boiled on the 4th day, especially in winter. So it's very practical here. He's talking about, of course, the specifics of eating the children. I'm going to skip a little more. I grant this food will be somewhat dear and therefore very proper for landlords who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children. I think that's very poignant and funny that that the animosity towards landlords was just as prevalent back then, and that he and his and Swift in this satirical piece is to curry favor for the proposal is showing how it will benefit landlords. Infant's flesh will be in season throughout the year, but more plentiful in March and a little before and after. For we are told by a grave author and eminent French physician that fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than at any other season. Therefore, reckoning a year after Lent, the markets will be more glutted than usual, because the number of popish infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom. And therefore, it will have one other collateral advantage by lessening the number of papists among us, papist being a synonym for Catholic. So he's saying not only will this create more food, therefore more business and sustenance for the city and for the kingdom, but it will get rid of more Catholics because Catholics are outnumbering Protestants 3 to 1. In, I'm assuming, Dublin. I think he says, in the city or in the country. Okay. He does some more computing here about basically showing the profit mothers would have. I'm going to skip it. What it costs to raise the child by 1 year, clothe and feed and raise the child versus what she would make by selling the child or keeping the child, I should say, versus clothing and feeding it up to a year to then sell it and what that profit would be, which comes to 8 shillings. No idea what that would be with inflation today. So I thought this part was also funny. Those who are more thrifty, as I must confess the times require, may flay the carcass, the skin of which artificially dressed will make admirable gloves for ladies and summer boots for fine gentlemen. So use every piece. I think if this was written today, this would be a tugging at the bleeding heartstrings of liberals, kind of making a parallel to the Native Americans, using every piece of the animal here, using every piece of the child. It's not just used for sustenance, but for gloves and boots. This is one of, I think, the most descriptive paragraphs that's coming up of the piece. As to our city of Dublin, shambles may be appointed for this purpose in the most convenient parts of it, and butchers, we may be assured, will not be wanting, although I rather recommend buying the children alive and dressing them hot from the knife, as we do roasting pigs. So that, if you didn't have the imagery already of how they're going to butcher the children, that really lays it out there, which is kind of, to me, feels like a lot of shock value for 1729. There's a couple long paragraphs here I'm going to skip, and then we're going to move on to some persons of a desponding spirit are in great concern about that vast number of poor people who are aged, diseased, or maimed, and I have been desired to employ my thoughts what course may be taken to ease the nation of so grievous an encumbrance, but I am not in the least pain upon the matter, because it is very well known that they are every day dying and rotting by cold and famine and filth and vermin as fast as can be reasonably expected. As to the young laborers, they are now in as hopeful a condition they cannot get work, and consequently pine away for want of nourishment, to a degree that if at any time they are accidentally hired to common labor, they have not strength to perform it, and thus the country and themselves are happily delivered from the evils to come. He's basically saying there how shitty it is, and do you want these children are going to grow up anyway? If they make it to old age, they will be suffering, rotting in the cold and famine and their own filth and vermin. And before that, they won't probably be able to work because they'll be too weak to do any sort of physical labor. Of course, any other labor really isn't an option for the Irish at this time, so it seems, to the Irish Catholics, I should say. Okay, so here he goes over kind of a 6-point plan that I will address, and this really lays out each part of the proposal, some of the best arguments for it. So, for first, as I have already observed, it would greatly lessen the number of papists with whom we are yearly overrun, being the principal breeders of the nation, as well as our most dangerous enemies, who stay at home on purpose with the design to deliver the kingdom to the pretender, hoping to take their advantage by the absence of so many good Protestants, who have chosen rather to leave their country than to stay at home and pay tithes against their conscience to an episcopal curate. Simply gets rid of Catholics. Less Catholics, the better. Secondly, the poorer tenants will have something valuable of their own, which by law may be made liable to distress and help to pay their landlord's rent, their corn and cattle being already seized, and money a thing unknown. This is one of my favorite ones. They're saying that this is an asset. Instead of a burden, a child can be an asset because you don't have anything. Your landlord, of course, owns your property, not just the roof over your head, but your food, their corn, cattle, also belongs to the landlord, and you don't know anything of money because money's unknown to you. And now, if you can sell your children for food, it gives you an asset. So win-win. Thirdly, whereas the maintenance of 100,000 children from 2 years old and upward cannot be computed at less than 10 shillings apiece per annum, the nation's stock will be thereby increased 50,000 pounds per annum, besides the profit of a new dish introduced to the tables of all gentlemen of fortune in the kingdom who have any refinement and taste, and the money will circulate among ourselves, the goods being entirely of our own growth and manufacture. This one's also great because I feel like he's really trying to convince the upper crust of society here, saying that not only will this create a stronger economy, more money flowing, because of course, while the poor Irish mothers will have an asset in selling their children, really the whole trade, like all other trades, will be run by the aristocracy at some point, because everything flows up to them. And also will create a new dish for the country, and cuisine being very important to any thriving culture. So it's not just an economic benefit, but a cultural benefit. Again, really trying to convince the aristocracy. Fourthly, the constant breeders, beside the gain of 8 shillings sterling per annum by the sale of their children, will be rid of the charge of maintaining them after the first year. So it's kind of like exponential gains. Not only will you make money by selling it, you don't have to pay to raise it. Fifthly, this food would likewise bring great custom to taverns, where the vintners will certainly be so prudent as to procure the best recipes for dressing it to perfection, and consequently have their houses frequented by all the fine gentlemen who justly value themselves upon their knowledge and good eating. And a skillful cook who understands how to oblige his guests will contrive to make it as expensive as they please. This is kind of a trickle-down idea, and that taverns where kind of ordinary people, where the ordinary people dine and drink, will get a stimulus. This will kind of be like stimulating this so-called middle class economy. And if you're a smart tavern owner, you can really make a buck here because you can contrive to make it as expensive as you please. It's a new cuisine, and there will be a lot of demand for it. And sixthly, this is my favorite. This would be a great inducement to marriage, which all wise nations have either encouraged by rewards or enforced by laws and penalties. It would increase the care and tenderness of mothers toward their children when they were sure of a settlement for life to the poor babes, provided in some sort by the public through their annual profit instead of expense. I want to stop there real quick. I love this. I love this 6th point because I feel like this whole. Let me see if this is. Yeah, this whole time, it's written in such a expert, not really. It's totally economic with a little bit of culture there with the cuisine. It's about stimulating the economy, how the rich will benefit, how the poor will benefit, but all economically. And here he gets more to the domestic side of things and how this will encourage marriage because instead of having a burden having children, it'll make people want to have children. So it'll be like starting a small business together. And right here, the poor bit providing some sort by the public. So this is a community. The community works together to have children and sell children and eat children to their annual profit instead of expense. I'll continue. We should see an honest emulation among the married women. Which of them could bring the fattest child to the market? I can already see, like, I could just imagine booths set up in the dirty market and wherever the market areas of Dublin, and just women, big voluptuous women, big-breasted women plopping their fat children onto the table, and maybe there's like a scale or something. I guess, yeah, scales definitely existed back then. And I could just see that being a side satirical piece to this. Maybe I'll write that. Men would become as fond of, this one's great. Men would become as fond of their wives during the time of their pregnancy as they are now of their mares in foal, their cows and calf, their sows when they are ready to farrow, nor offer to beat or kick them, as is too frequent a practice for fear of a miscarriage. Hey, less domestic violence. This just keeps getting better because the wife will be carrying an asset instead of a burden. The husband will be less likely to beat the shit out of her and causing a miscarriage. So just so many benefits. I'll read some more benefits here. He doesn't continue with the enumerated ones, but many other advantages might be enumerated. For instance, the addition of some 1,000 carcasses in our exportation of barreled beef, the propagation of swine's flesh, an improvement in the art of making good bacon, so much wanted among us by the great destruction of pigs too frequent at our tables, which are no way comparable in taste or magnificence to a well-grown fat yearling child, which roasted whole will make a considerable figure at a Lord Mayor's feast or any other public entertainment. But this and many others I omit, being studious of brevity. Basically saying I could go on, but for brevity's sake, I'm not going to. He says, I can think of no one objection that will possibly be raised against this proposal, unless it should be urged that the number of people will be thereby much lessened in the kingdom. So he's basically saying you cannot argue with this. This is largely an inarguable proposal. The only one being that we're going to have less people. He goes on here. I'm going to skip. I think I'm going to skip a lot of this for my own brevity's sake, and go on to the final 2 paragraphs. After all, I'm not so violently bent upon my own opinion as to reject any offer proposed by wise men, which shall be found equally innocent, cheap, easy, and effectual. So basically, if you can find something as cumulatively beneficial as this proposal, I'm not opposed to it. But it needs to, this is innocent, cheap, easy, and effective. But before something of that kind will be advanced in contradiction to my scheme and offering a better, I desire the author or authors would please maturely to consider 2 points. First, as things now stand, how they will be able to find food and raiment for 100,000 useless mouths and backs. And secondly, there being around million of creatures in human figure throughout this kingdom whose whole subsistence put into a common stock will leave them in debt 2 millions of pounds sterling, adding those who are beggars by profession to the bulk of farmers, cottagers, and laborers, with their wives and children who are beggars in effect. I desire those politicians who dislike my overture and may perhaps be so bold as to attempt an answer that they will first ask the parents of these mortals whether they would not at this day think it a great happiness to have been sold for food, at a year old in the manner I prescribe, and thereby have avoided such a perpetual scene of misfortunes as they have since gone through by the oppression of landlords, the impossibility of paying rent without money or trade, the want of common sustenance, with neither house nor clothes to cover them from the inclemencies of the weather, and the most inevitable prospect of entailing the like or greater miseries upon their breed forever. That is the most scathing part of A Modest Proposal, because this is where he lays out basically saying he's speaking to both those he's trying to convince here and the poor of Ireland, of Dublin, who he's saying, why wouldn't you be rather sold at 1 year of age to be food instead of go through all these horrible misfortunes? That is the reality of Ireland at this time. Basically, you're better off being food. Lastly, he ends with a nice witticism. I profess in the sincerity of my heart that I have not the least personal interest in endeavoring to promote this necessary work, having no other motive than the public good of my country, by advancing our trade, providing for infants, relieving the poor, and giving some pleasure to the rich. I have no children by which I can propose to get a single penny, the youngest being 9 years old, and my wife past childbearing. So he's saying that he's being completely philanthropic here, just trying to do a public good. He will not personally benefit from this because his children are too old, and his wife is also too old. I really loved that. I kind of remembered that from school. I don't know what made me think of it. I heard it in passing. I forget if it was on a podcast or I read it, and then I think it was on a podcast, and then I printed it out and read it, and I absolutely love it. It's a must read. I think for any writer, that is peak satire, which I want to get into the 2 styles of satire. Well, there's like 3, but I'm only going to talk about 2. And I don't want to sound like a dictionary here, so I just want to touch on the 2 most common ones, which are Horatian and Juvenalian. Horatian being a more introspective and funny and a less scathing form of satire. Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock is an example of this. I don't really know what that is. That's what kept coming up for an example of Horatian. I think a more contemporary type is SNL. It's usually, impersonations, touching on contemporary issues, but again, it's cable television. At least for most sensibilities, it's really not going very far, but it still will use satire to make its point. The latter being Juvenalian, that's what A Modest Proposal is. It's more pointed, it's darker, it's an attack of a system, of a government, of a person. Animal Farm is another example of this. Some of my favorite examples of satire, I did mostly novels here, but there's some movies too. So American Psycho, that would be Juvenalian. Also, I think one of the misconceptions of satire is that it has to be funny, even witty funny. And I don't think American Psycho does that at all. It's still satire. It's obviously satiring the finance culture of the 1980s, the greed of the 1980s and early 90s, an obsession with name brands where you're eating dinner, while also I think the best one of my favorite memes that's come out of American Psycho is when I'm blanking on his name right now, but the main character, I'm very upset I'm blanking on his name, but he's going on about how you have to support the ACLU and you have to help the starving children of whatever country that is, and the civil rights of a certain country, and all these things you have to fix, and you have to help the poor and minorities and gay people and all these things. And meanwhile, like, as the viewer that he's this horrible evil monster. And everyone kind of nods and smiles at that while they're eating in a very fancy restaurant in suits, and they're all putting down their very heavy credit cards to split the hundreds of dollar bill. Starship Troopers is another great example of satire. Now, what I love about Starship Troopers is that the movie is satire. The book is very much not. I don't think a lot of people realize that. The book is very much a pro-militarism kind of, I guess you would say now, trad cat book, service for citizenship, might makes right, discipline, and all of those values are upheld as legitimate and core values of a person, of a citizen, of a country or an empire, a federation. There's the Galactic Federation, or is it the World Federation? I forget. But the movie very much is a satire, and it's a satire on militarism. There's a reason that they make Neil Patrick Harris's character in that kind of upper brass. They look like Nazis. The ridiculousness of the mobile infantry shooting at these bugs with machine guns while they're being literally ripped to shreds. Just kind of the absurdity of it all. I think the most obvious parts of the movie that are satire are kind of the jingoist recruitment videos or commercials. The "Would you like to know more?" and then do your duty or whatever it is. I can't remember exactly, but like how do you support the Federation? Other ones are a Confederacy of Dunces, Catch-22, Holes, Choke by Palahniuk. It Can't Happen Here, which is one of my favorites, even though I think it is based on Huey Long, who I think is one of the best political figures of our country. Controversial or not, as controversial as that is, I'm a big fan of Huey Long. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Animal Farm. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn being probably the most censored of these. I mean, some of these would never be in schools anyway, like American Psycho, a book that even I had to put down at times. It became so graphic, and that usually doesn't bother me, but I had to say sometimes, all right, that's enough for now. The Adventure of Huckleberry Finn really strictly based on the N-word that's used. I remember reading in school. It was weird. But the point is to show the evils of slavery. It's satirizing the South, the slave trade. And so the message is supposed to be good, but it is usually one of the most censored books in the American school system. So I bring this up really because I've wanted to talk about satire for a while. I write satirical pieces. Sometimes I can't help it. I tend to be, I don't think satire and sarcasm are the same thing. Spoofing and lampooning and all these things that are very similar. They can all somewhat be synonymous, but I do think satire has a certain wit to it, and I think satire tends to be a little bit above. I like to believe a little more effort put in, but again, that's probably not true. And I do want to talk about the last piece I want to read. It's called "The End of Satire," which was a New York Times article, and how satire is changing and could it be dangerous. You know my view on that. But more recently, the Babylon Bee was suspended on Twitter. Babylon Bee is kind of like, to put it lazily, I guess it's like a conservative The Onion. I suppose The Onion is liberal. I don't really follow it anymore. I don't really remember. I don't think that they're very like both sidesism. The Babylon Bee very much is more ideological. I think their job has become much easier with how crazy liberals and people on the left can be. Again, a side that I associate with and a lot on a lot of issues, but in terms of the art and free speech culture, some of these wedge issues I just find really disturbing. So they were suspended for saying something that would be considered not very nice. And they tweeted, this was back in March, that Rachel Levine, who is, what is she? U.S. Assistant Secretary for Health at the U.S. Department of Health, who is a trans woman, they tweeted that she was the Man of the Year because she had been awarded Woman of the Year. This is the big issue now. This is the kind of untouchable. I don't want to get into that term, but this is the untouchable issue of, I guess, like social media, especially meme culture. I've even spoken to people who are generally open to discussing anything, but they'll say, I don't want to talk about the transgender issue. What that means, what transgender issue means, I don't know exactly. I think most people have fairly nuanced views about it, but nuance is not fun. It doesn't get the base going. So they were suspended for 12 hours if they removed the tweet, which they refused to do, which I respect, whether I agree with them or not. I don't think so. I do think Twitter has representatives of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, and I remember on that Rogan episode with Tim Pool, Jack Dorsey, and his lawyer, I forget her name. They're saying that's a neutral site. They have these neutral rules that they apply to everyone, which is just like objectively untrue. And as you know, ISIS accounts will be up, Al Qaeda accounts, other sorts of racist or sexist accounts will stay up, even when they tweet really horrific things, whether it's or Antifa groups calling for violence. It seems very one-sided. Doesn't mean that left-wing groups are never censored. They definitely are. Not that Al Qaeda and ISIS are left-wing at all, but in the victimization pyramid, it seems like they get more leeway because of the victimization pyramid, where Muslims tend to be higher than other groups. And I'm sorry, come here, buddy. And the Babylon Bee will get suspended. A group like the Babylon Bee will get suspended, which is known for being satire. I'll get into that because they're talking about the most, I would say, of all protected classes, they're the most protected class. I would say, even other people in these intersectional pretzels, you could be many things. You could have many boxes checked. If it's not transgender and you say something critical of transgenderism, you're pilloried. So again, here, this to me seems especially egregious because this is a public figure. Rachel Levine is she works for the government. She won this major award. She has a big role in the U.S. government. She's a public figure, and to say something as simple as Man of the Year, I don't really get it. I know that a lot of people would really disagree with me on this. It doesn't mean it's nice. It doesn't mean it's an okay thing to say in terms of like being nice, but to suspend a group for hate speech by misgendering them, that is political. That's not neutral. Because here, with this whole thing, it's like, well, when does it become? When do you become a woman? When do you become a man? Those are questions that are worth asking. And anyone could say, well, you called me this and I'm actually this, and then is that person suspended? Do you have to know? And then how would Twitter know that that you're misgendering on person? They know here because the Babylon Bee is satire. So, and so they expect you to know who this person is. What if they didn't have a picture of Rachel Levine? I don't know. This is a very sticky issue, but this Forbes article. I should. Who's this? Peter Suchiu? I don't know who that is. Rightfully points out that it had the opposite reaction. So this didn't have a lot of traction when it first happened. The post, the Man of the Year post. And they say if Twitter's goal had been to remove the harmful content, it backfired spectacularly. The original tweet, which was posted on March 15th, had largely flown under the radar. Yet, when news that the parody site's account was suspended, the tweet suddenly went viral. It's called the Streisand effect, which we talked about a lot on the show. Let's see. And because once something's posted, it's going to exist forever. It's going to be screenshotted. It doesn't go away. If anything, you just give more power to the person saying it. The right reaction would be to, say something about the Babylon Bee, make fun of them. In fact, they make fun of themselves because they get criticized for only going after transgender people, which is just not true. I follow the Babylon Bee. They go after everyone. And they make fun, they poke fun at themselves, saying it has just one joke. It said, Babylon Bee writer struggling to come up with new material after Twitter bans one of their two jokes. So I think, and this is tough for a lot of people to accept, but I think if you make fun of people and you treat them like everyone else, which was what the goal was. The goal used to be, treat everyone like you want to be treated. Treat whether people are gay or a different race, different nationality, different religion, treat them how you want to be treated. And if the Babylon Bee would throw a hissy fit and try and get people canceled, for lack of a better term, for ripping on them, well, then, yeah, they'd be hypocrites, of course. But I doubt they would. I'm sure they would welcome any sort of jockeying. And I think that's the route to go, because the more you treat and people of these quote unquote protected classes, people will tell you this. I don't want to be infantilized. You can make fun of me just like you may, there's some topics that maybe might be a little much. Certain people maybe shouldn't make that joke, but that, the response would be to make a joke at their expense. It's not to censor it, because that's just gonna give more power to the person who's making the joke or the claim. I really think that that's what we're seeing with the trans community. And I don't know if you saw Dave Chappelle's controversial special on that there's that backlash against him, which ended up failing spectacularly. But in that, there was the trans friend who said, who was herself a comedian and liked being a part of the community, and ragging on herself and ragging on other people, and the same getting to her. And she just wanted to be treated like everyone else, and to suspend something so simple as changing one word, that, this wasn't a threat of violence. This wasn't doxing. targeted harassment is going to be a tough argument to make when you're a public figure. This wasn't some private trans citizen. This is a public figure of the U.S. government, and to protect them from a meme or from a satirical post is because it's mean. I mean, horrible things were said about Barack Obama and George Bush, and lesser. Those are presidents, but lesser people in the government. I don't think you're doing trans people any favors by treating them like children, because they're not children. A lot of them have actually been through a lot. They're already different in the vast majority of spaces, and I don't think that they need you to protect them. I think they're capable of protecting themselves. Maybe that's too blunt. Maybe that's insensitive. I don't know. I would hear arguments to the contrary. I'm happy to it. If someone want to come on and tell me why this is a suspendable offense. Hate speech is protected speech in this country. The argument always Twitter, yes, private company, I understand that. But then what kind of slope do you want to go down? And I think this is one of the areas where Twitter and social media really drops the ball a lot. So moving on from that, I want to lastly discuss the End of Satire, which is funny because this was written in 2019. This is Justin E.H. Smith. It says, Mr. Smith is a philosophy professor and author. I really did like a lot of what Professor Smith had to say here. There's one paragraph I just don't really get, though. I think he answers his own question, but he comes out swinging, which I appreciate, basically defending Charlie Hebdo during the 2015 slayings of cartoonists in the street, which really, even at some of my most progressive, and I wasn't really at that time, it would be like the next year or two, but even then I would consider myself just kind of a liberal Democrat. I found this abhorrent. I could not believe that people were in a way defending the slayings or explaining why they happened, but not in a, well, this is what they think sort of way, but this is what they think, and this is why you shouldn't make these cartoons, which is just absolutely insane to me. Again, kind of the same concept of, they're going to make fun of everyone. Charlie Hebdo does make fun of everyone by uprising, but by having so much kind of ardor against the Muslim Muhammad cartoons. You're just giving more power to them because it's getting a rise. They're satirists. That's the point. If the Catholics were constantly doing that, which Charlie Hebdo makes a lot of Pope jokes, I've read some of their stuff, they would probably keep it up. They would lean into it even harder. So by not just getting the Muslims upset, but by getting bleeding heart liberals upset with it, it just gives them a reason to do it. Do it more. It gives them a telos. So, because the telos of the satirists is to bring light to injustices and sacred cows, to eat sacred cows, and to make people think differently and pose questions, and to do that by not just doing it, by impersonation, by caricature, and all these different, by wit. So he says here, satire is a species of humor that works through impersonation, taking on voices of others, saying the sort of things they would say using one's own voice while not speaking in one's own name. It's not surprising that this craft is so often misunderstood. So when satirists do their job convincingly, when they get too close to their target, it is easy to hear them not just as the characters of the views expressed in the satire, but as defenders of these views as well. It is at such moments that critics like to exclaim that a satirist has gone too far. It would be more correct to say that satirist has only done his job too well. Great paragraph. I always say good satire that you don't have to explain. I do want to note that there have been a couple instances where I think the Serbian president, I thought the Gambian president also had cited The Onion during some sort of press conference. I did look it up. So the Serbian president did. It didn't seem like that. It was like something about window washers dying every day in the U.S. or something like that, some kind of anodyne. Although the Gambian president did also. In more personal experience, I saw someone I follow on Facebook, a Facebook friend, I should say, let's say an older woman, probably a boomer, I guess would be a boomer, shared it was the Babylon Bee, and it was after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and whatever that thing was called that Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to wear around her neck, that white, I don't know, doily looking thing, a kind of collar. It had a bunch of NBA players, and it was like LeBron and a bunch of NBA players sitting on the bench with that, clearly, and in solidarity, but clearly not true. I'm just kind of talking about poking fun at the biased ideologies of the NBA and how political it's become. I saw this person, sharing it and saying, now this is progress or something like that. I think that's what she said. And I didn't have the guts to tell her that it was fake. It was also kind of fun. Okay. Mr. Professor Smith here says that basically new technologies are making this more confusing, making satire more confusing and potentially dangerous. He uses the D word. He actually calls it toxic disinformation. And here he actually also cites, the Onion being cited by a foreign government, which was the Chinese government, where they cited the 2002 Onion article that said Congress threatens to leave DC unless new capital is built. The target here obviously were the petulant professional sports teams holding American municipalities at ransom by threatening to leave if they do not get a greater share of local taxes. This was lost, however, on the editors of the Beijing Evening News, who took the story as a straightforward sign of the decline of American democracy. I can recall my smirking attitude when the same Chinese newspaper acknowledged soon after that had been fooled. Some small American newspapers, the paper chided, frequently fabricate offbeat news to trick people into noticing them with the aim of making money. Hey, you know what? At least they acknowledged it. I don't think papers, even this one, the New York Times, would even acknowledge if that happened now. Again, this was 2019, and that was back in 2002. These cathedral media, they get shit wrong all the time. If they do make a correction, it's in a footnote. It's barely, the damage has been done. And sometimes they don't even seem to bother. Okay. He talks about how, more satire has started coming from anonymous sources. One, I think that's just part of social media. It's fun to be anonymous because you don't have to deal with any personal repercussions, which you shouldn't have to anyway. So my note here is, well, do you because he cites previously really popular satirical shows like the Colbert Report and Saturday Night Live, which to me have become so bland and boring and establishment, because they can't be as subversive, or they can be but only towards one side or at certain targets, that real satire has to come from anonymous sources, or else you get doxxed or threatened, or whatever repercussions there should be for speech that shouldn't have those repercussions. Outside of criticism is fine, but it's gone beyond that. It's people trying to get other people fired. I think there's always been a little of that, but it's gotten to the point where it's so easy to just email a company, an employer, because someone says something that is verboten, and that's why people have to go anonymous to make really true, funny satire or witty satire. So that's my response to him there. This is one of my favorites too. In early 2018, the Twitter account known as Pixelated Boat offered what it claimed was an excerpt from Michael Wolff's recently published Trump expose, Fire and Fury. It was related that upon arriving at the White House, the new president complained that that the television options there did not include what he called the guerrilla channel. So the staff began transmitting guerrilla documentaries from a makeshift tower outside his window until he complained that these were boring, that the guerrillas were not fighting enough. So they edited the documentaries down to the fight scenes, at which point the president was appeased and knelt in front of the TV from morning until night. It's funny because it sounds like something that Trump would actually do, which is what's great about satire. And here he says, this was excellent satire, just believable enough to be entertained as true. I myself believed it for about 5 minutes, and I was indignant when I realized I had been fooled. I thought of the stiff functionaries in Beijing who had also reacted poorly to getting played. I realized they were right. I love that just imagining Trump just being so upset that one, he didn't get the guerrilla channel, whatever the fuck that is, and two, that the guerrillas were not fighting enough, and demanding that this frazzled staff find him, edit down the guerrilla channels. It's just fight scenes, then him just kind of sitting there going good as the guerrillas fight each other to death. I don't know. I love that imagery. And that's, again, really great satire. What then? And so I really love this piece up until, and I did just start following Mr. Professor Smith. I want to see where he is now. This is 2019. People have made huge shifts since 2019. I can't imagine this being published in the New York Times in 2019. I hope. I did a cursory glance at his timeline. He seems like he's kind of stuck to the same viewpoints concerning free speech. Doesn't seem like he went hard, QAnon conspiracy theory. Doesn't look like he went kind of establishment resistance, blue wave Democrat craziness. So that's good. What he does say here, though, does kind of bother me. I'll read the paragraph. Over the past few years, I've been made to see, in some, that the nature and extent of satire is not nearly as simple a question as I had previously imagined. I'm now prepared to agree that some varieties of expression that may have some claim to being satire should indeed be prohibited. Hate that. I note this not with a plan or proposal for where or how such a prohibition might be enforced, but to acknowledge something I did not fully understand until I experienced it firsthand, that even the most cherished and firmly held values or ideals can change when the world in which those values were first formed changes. No, I hate this. I hate where he's going with this. He says that some of this is not good. I have no plan or proposal for how to fix it or how anyone should fix it or even begin to fix it, but I just think it's bad. The world has changed. That's not, I completely disagree with that. My note here is so ... what? Then he kind of answers his question here. I hate to have to say this, and I feel that while it is an admission necessitated by the changing times, it also could not come at a worse time. The madness of 2015 has not subsided. That's an understatement. In an astounding article in the British newspaper, The Independent, in February, Sean O'Grady attempted to stoke the decades-old fatwa against Salman Rushdie for his satirical take on the life of Muhammad in the Satanic Verses. Rushdie's silly, childish book, the columnist writes, should be banned under today's anti-hate legislation. It's no better than racist graffiti on a bus stop. O'Grady proudly admits that he has never read the book. In this, he's just like the Ayatollah Khomeini before him. So that seems to have answered his question. Do you know how you can stop some of this speech that should be prohibited? Anti-hate legislation, which does things like bans novels, bans books, bans YouTube videos, and it would ban or does, and that's the UK, of course, not here, but it bans art. And the theme, one of the constant themes of this show is that you're not the free speech, the First Amendment, and the concept. And I always like just saying the First Amendment because the First Amendment is to protect, from government censorship, all that. But the principle of the First Amendment is to protect speech that you don't like, right? Because one day the speech that you like could be the speech that those in power don't like. And you have to protect that principle, protect that value. So a way to stop that in a country that doesn't have free speech laws like we do, like the UK, is to have anti-hate legislation, which will, of course, devolve into banning a novel by a one of the most, I guess, laureled, I don't know if that's a verb or adjective, writers of our time, one of the most well-known and beautiful writers of our time. Let's see. Is my own belated acknowledgement of the need to regulate satire and unwitting discovery of common cause with the likes of O'Grady? I certainly hope not. Well, it fucking is, dude. O'Grady belongs to what seems to be an increasingly common species of moral coward, a dupe of totalitarians, spiritual brother of the Charlie Hebdo assassins. I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty strong language, and I love it, but that's pretty strong language. Whereas I'm only trying to respond to the real threats of hitherto unimagined technologies. Always love when you can put hitherto into a sentence. The satanic verses, I tell myself, is literature where free play of the imagination is the rule of the game and the inalienable right of the creator. Twitter is, well, something else. No, I disagree there. Again, we can't all write. As much as I would personally love to, as someone who writes novels, we cannot all write like Salman Rushdie. We don't have the resources. Well, we don't have the skill. We don't have the resources to put out books like that. And to I guess should say to have them spread like Salman Rushdie book does. We don't have the time. Not everyone has the time to write novels to address a certain viewpoint or to criticize something or to satirize something. And some people, for the vast majority of people, all they have is Twitter to put out their viewpoint, and if that's in the form of satire. So I don't think that it should be left just to the gatekeepers, or like you shouldn't be gatekeeping who gets to be satirical and who doesn't. Whether that satire is in a crude meme that you find reprehensible, or whether it's in a 400-page novel about a one of the most, if not the most dangerous topics to criticize, the Prophet Muhammad. So, here I'm like I appreciate this article by Professor Smith. I think a lot of it is, I agree with him on the vast majority of it. I think he just goes too far. He answers his own question, and then he sounds a little too kind of gatekeepy and elitist for me there at the end, where he makes a distinction between the obvious, of course, distinction between a novel like Satanic Verses and Twitter, instead of just saying, well, they should both be protected. You could put, I have read the Satanic Verses, I have it on my bookshelf. You could distill any novel into a tweet. So is that not protected just because it's not written in flowery prose? It's not written beautifully over 300, 400 pages, or because it's 280 characters. I think that's what Twitter is now. No, it's wrong. They both have to be protected. And I think that's it. And that's all I have for today. My voice is getting a little sore. Thanks for listening. Again, this is the takeover of the Reckless Musecast, episode 40. I'm Ben D'Alessio. Find me at bendalessio.com. Find my work and Joe's work and other contributors on the Reckless Muse Medium page, where I have short stories, movie reviews, satirical pieces, political pieces, all sorts of things. And find my co-host Joe's work there also. Please remember to stay reckless and fight the crits. Thanks, everyone.